That night seemed like so many others, but something was different. The rain poured down the window, and the silence of the empty house enveloped me like a reminder that I was alone. Henrique, as always, was away on business. I should be used to it, but I wasn't. The glass of wine in my hand wasn't enough to dispel the emptiness that was growing inside me. Something restless ran through my body, a suffocated desire, a need I didn't want to name. But that night would change everything, in a way I could never have imagined. That rainy night, the loneliness seemed more intense. Seeking comfort, I decided to allow myself an intimate moment, something rare since Henrique started traveling frequently. The room was dark. Only the soft light of the lamp illuminated the room. I closed my eyes, letting myself be carried away by the moment of privacy. But then, a noise made me freeze. My heart raced, and before I could react, the bedroom door opened. Time seemed to stop. Caio stood there, motionless, his eyes wide. The shock on his face mirrored my own. My body froze. I wanted to cover myself, talk, pretend nothing had happened, but I couldn't move. Neither could he. The silence between us was deafening, filled with something that shouldn't have been there. Finally, he looked away, muttered something inaudible and left, closing the door. But the damage had already been done. Something had changed, and I knew it wouldn't end there. Caio stood in the doorway, motionless. The rain outside made a distant noise, but inside the room, the silence was overwhelming. His breathing seemed rapid, and his gaze wavered between me and the floor. He sniffled, trying to break the discomfort. "Are you okay?" His voice was hesitant, almost a whisper. My heart was pounding. I tried to cover myself quickly, but my movements were clumsy, too hasty, as if any second more exposure would make the situation worse. I needed to say something, to dispel the atmosphere, to bring normality back. But how? He was still standing there, not moving. The way he looked at me wasn't just shock or embarrassment. There was something else, something that sent a shiver through my skin. Finally, he lowered his eyes and took a step back, mumbling an apology. The door closed, but even without seeing him, I knew that look would remain forever. The tension between us became impossible to ignore. After that night, every encounter seemed to carry a hidden meaning. At breakfast, we avoided looking at each other directly, but I felt his gaze on me when he thought I wouldn't notice. The silence between us spoke louder than any words. Caio began to be more present, appearing in the rooms of the house for no apparent reason. Whereas before he spent most of his time in his room or out with friends, now he always found an excuse to be around. Sometimes he would grab a glass of water from the kitchen at the exact moment I was there. At other times, he would sit in the living room while I read a book, saying nothing, just existing there, too close. His gaze changed. There was something different about the way he looked at me, a mixture of curiosity and something deeper. I tried to ignore it, but my body reacted before my mind. Every time our eyes met, I felt that same shiver from that night. The sound of the knife cutting the vegetables was interrupted by Caio's voice. His presence behind me made my shoulders stiffen before he even spoke. "About last night," he began, leaving the sentence hanging in the air. I pretended not to hear and kept cutting, trying to keep my breathing steady. "Have you really forgotten?" he insisted, his voice low, carrying something that made me hold my breath. My hands froze for an instant. The heat from the pot on the stove seemed minimal compared to what was rising through my body at that moment. "There's nothing to remember," I replied, keeping my gaze fixed on the cutting board. But even I could hear the hesitant tone in my voice. Caio took a step forward, leaning on the counter. "I think there is," he replied, forcing me to face him. His gaze was intense, firm, as if searching for a truth I couldn't admit. The air became heavy, and at that moment I realized ignoring it wouldn't make it go away. The kitchen was lit only by the yellowish lights under the cupboards, creating an intimate atmosphere. Caio stirred the pasta in the pan while I chopped the spices, but my focus was far from the food. His every move seemed deliberate, as if testing the invisible boundaries between us. "Did you always cook with my father?" he asked, his voice low, as if each word carried more weight than it should. I hesitated before answering, feeling the warmth of his closeness. "Sometimes," I mumbled, trying to sound nonchalant. He smiled sideways, picking up a glass of wine and handing it to me. Our fingers touched lightly, and the electricity of the moment made my body react before my mind could even process it. "So, today is a special moment," he said, keeping his gaze fixed on me. Dinner was almost ready, but something else was bubbling between us. Something unspoken, dangerous, that grew with every sustained glance and every subtle gesture that went unnoticed. Or perhaps, not so unnoticed. The storm outside made the whole house seem even quieter. The lights had gone out minutes before, and now only the flickering flame of the candles illuminated the table. Dinner went on between spaced-out sentences, glances that crossed each other's eyes for longer than they should have. The wine made everything even hazier, more intense. When I reached out to take my glass, Caio did the same. Our fingers touched, a brief but meaningful contact. Neither of us moved away immediately. His fingertips brushed mine, and the warmth of his skin made my body react before my mind could even process it. Caio looked at me, his breathing almost imperceptible, as if he was waiting for something, any sign. I could have backed away. I should have backed away, but I stayed there, trapped in that instant that seemed to stretch out in time. Outside, the rain beat down on the city. Inside that room, something much more dangerous was brewing between us. The flame flickered between us, casting soft shadows over his face. The silence dragged on for seconds too long.
Like and subscribe now so you don't miss out on new stories.
And then Caio murmured, almost like a secret that had escaped without permission. "You're incredible. You know that?" My heart raced, and I clutched the rim of my glass as if it could anchor me in reality. I tried to smile, to pretend it was just an innocent comment, but the depth in his gaze told another story. I swallowed, aware of the danger in the air. "Caio," I began, but my voice failed me. He didn't look away. He just waited, as if he knew I wouldn't find an answer that would put an end to it. I needed to put an end to this approach, to set limits, to act maturely. But why then did my mind keep repeating those words? Why did my skin tingle under his gaze? I hesitated, and deep down I knew that this hesitation could change everything. After that night, everything changed. Caio always seemed to be around, appearing at the most unexpected moments, finding any reason to start a conversation or prolong his presence in the house. If before there had been hesitation in his gestures, now he seemed more confident, testing the limits of that heavy silence that existed between us. I tried to convince myself that it was a coincidence, that I was just imagining things, but every look in his eyes told me otherwise. There was something there, a growing tension that neither time nor distance could dispel. Whenever we passed each other in the corridor, our bodies almost touched. Small gestures became too significant, like when he brushed his hand lightly against mine as he handed me a cup. My heart no longer knew right from wrong. It just beat faster. I knew I had to stop it before it was too late. But the problem was that, deep down, maybe I didn't want to. That morning, while I was preparing the coffee, my eyes fell on a small piece of folded paper next to the kettle. My fingers trembled as I opened it, and Caio's handwriting jumped out at me. "Laura, thanks for the company. Whenever you need someone, I'm here." The words were simple, but my heart reacted as if they carried a hidden meaning. What did he mean by that? Was it just an innocent gesture, or a veiled invitation to something I shouldn't want? I held the note for a long moment, feeling the weight of what we were building, even without direct words. He was making it clear that he wasn't going to back down. I took a deep breath and put the paper away in the drawer, as if hiding that proof would change anything. But the truth was that, from that moment on, running away would become even more difficult. The rain beat heavily against the windows, filling the house with a rhythmic, hypnotic sound. I was on the sofa, trying to distract myself with a book, but my mind wandered, restless. Then I heard slow footsteps approaching. Caio stopped next to me, hesitated for a moment, and, in a more serious tone than usual, asked softly, "Can we talk?" I closed the book slowly, feeling my heart racing. Before I could answer, he reached out and touched my hand lightly. The contact was subtle, but charged with intention. I should have stepped back, moved my hand away immediately, but I didn't. The warmth of his skin against mine made my breathing falter. The world around seemed suspended. The wind rattled the curtains. The storm outside seemed to reflect the chaos inside me. We were on the verge of something that shouldn't happen, but neither of us seemed ready to interrupt that moment. Caio's breathing mingled with mine, hot, ragged. I could feel his hesitation, but also something stronger, something that was pulling us towards an abyss from which we might not be able to return. Without my realizing it, he leaned in, and the space between us disappeared. My heart was hammering against my chest. My mind was screaming at me to stop, but my body wouldn't move. The light touch of his eyelashes on mine was enough to make my world spin. For an instant, everything disappeared. There was no right or wrong, just the heat of the moment, the electricity in the air, the desire we had been trying to ignore for too long. Then, like a shock of reality, guilt struck. I had to get away. I needed to end it before it was too late. But wasn't it already? The silence between us was deafening. My mind, once clouded by desire, was now screaming the truth that I was trying to ignore. What we were about to do was beyond any limit. I pulled away abruptly, feeling my chest rise and fall in short breaths. This can't go on. My voice came out firmly, but inside I was shaking. Caio remained motionless, his eyes fixed on me, charged with something I couldn't, or wouldn't, decipher. He didn't try to convince me. He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly, as if he knew that was the only possible answer. But the look in his eyes said more than any words. The rain kept pounding on the window, and the weight of the moment seemed to suffocate the air around us. I had made my decision, but then why did it feel as if something inside me was breaking? The emptiness that settled between us was almost worse than the tension before. Caio was still there, but not in the same way. There were no more lingering glances, casual touches, or words laden with something unsaid. Now everything was measured, controlled, distant. I should have felt relief. After all, it had to end. But instead, a discomfort grew inside me. His absence was as striking as his presence. The house seemed quieter, the days longer. When our paths crossed, a simple good morning was cold, polite, without any trace of what had almost happened. At night, alone, I would find myself remembering the last time I had been so close to him. It was a mistake, I knew, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't erase it from my mind, nor from my body. The house was silent, and tension hung in the air. Henrique had traveled again, and now Caio and I were alone once more. Everything seemed normal at first glance, but deep down we knew it wasn't. Every movement inside that house echoed differently, charged with a silent expectation. I avoided being in the same room as him for too long, but inevitably our gazes met. There were no direct words, but something invisible held us there, between desire and guilt. Caio seemed more sure of himself, but he still hesitated. He was waiting for something. And me? I wanted it too, but I couldn't let it happen again. My heart was at war, torn between reason and a feeling that was growing in spite of me. Every moment we spent together was a test for something I knew I needed to control, but I wasn't sure I could. The night was dense, filled with a silence that said more than any words. Caio approached slowly, his gaze fixed on me, waiting for something I couldn't give him. My heart raced when he stopped in front of me, so close that I could feel his breathing. "Can you pretend you don't feel anything?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. The air between us seemed electrified, heavy, impossible to ignore. I wanted to answer, but the words just wouldn't come out. He watched my face, searching for something in my eyes. But this time, I knew I had to find the strength. I took a deep breath, taking a step back. "This has to stop," I said, my voice shaky but firm. Caio said nothing. He just nodded slowly, but his gaze carried a mixture of frustration and understanding. Something between us had been broken, but not erased. I knew that moment would be marked forever. Every step I took away from Caio felt like an immense effort. My heart was heavy, my mind was screaming, but I knew I had done the only thing possible. Closing that door was necessary, but it hurt in a way I hadn't expected. When I reached the bedroom, I leaned against the door and closed my eyes. My body was still tense, as if I expected him to come after me, to say something that would change my mind. But the silence in the hallway was confirmation that it really was over. I lay on the bed and stared at the dark ceiling, feeling a strange emptiness. Avoiding that desire was the right decision, but then why did it feel like I was missing out on something? Perhaps because deep down, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Something had been awakened inside me, and trying to bury it didn't mean it would cease to exist. The days passed, but the feeling of emptiness remained. I tried to act normally, to follow my routine alongside Henrique, but my mind kept going back to the moments with Caio. His gaze, his presence, everything was still there, impregnated in me in a way that I didn't know how to erase. I knew I should forget, move on and pretend that nothing had happened. But how? When every detail of that night still burned into my skin. How could I bury something that, even though it was wrong, made my heart soar like it hadn't in years? Caio was present, but distant. Our gazes didn't meet in the same way, but the silence between us still said more than any words. I knew I couldn't give in, but a part of me wondered, what if I had chosen differently? And now, I leave that question to you. Would you follow the safe path, or risk everything for a forbidden desire?
Don't let this opportunity pass you by. On the left, I've separated an exclusive video for you. On the right, I've left a playlist with videos you like. Click on the screen now and choose.